Stop playing with my name. I
Let's
ain't
go
gonna
right
say it
on
no
in.
more. Nigga, when my name come up, respect it.
Let's go.
Stop playing with my fucking name. All three of y'all, stop playing with my name. I ain't gonna say it no more.
On April 22nd, 2016, Birdman entered the studio of The Breakfast Club unlike any other guest. No smiles, no handshakes. He sat down with a heavy, brooding gaze. Before the cameras even started rolling, he straightened up, locked eyes with the show's three famous hosts, and fired off a series of words like bullets. Stop playing with my name. Put some respect on my name. In that moment, the words weren't just a personal warning. They were a declaration from a man fighting to preserve his authority amid a storm of questions, doubt, and betrayal. Birdman, real name, Brian Baby Williams, was once hailed as the architect behind one of the greatest hip-hop empires in the world, Cash Money Records. With a philosophy rooted in loyalty, Southern charm, and shrewd strategy, he helped launch a roster of stars to the top. But over time, those familiar faces, Juvenile BG, Mannie Fresh, Lil Wayne, Tyga, each walked away, leaving behind wounds, lawsuits, and accusations of greed and coldness behind the scenes. At 56 years old, Birdman no longer dodges the heat. He candidly admits there are artists he can't stand and would never work with again. So who are the 7 names that were once inseparable from him, only to become lasting scars on his career and legacy? And what exactly broke down inside the family? Birdman once gave everything to build. Juvenile, the trailblazer, and the quiet departure, New Orleans, late 1990s. In a small recording studio, the sound of bling bling echoed for the first time, not just as an effect, but as a prophecy. From that very space, Cash Money began its journey into the mainstream spotlight. And the man who carried that light was none other than Juvenile, the stage name of Terrius Gray, a young man from Uptown who didn't just lend his voice, but laid the foundation for an entire empire. When 400 Degrees dropped in 1998, no one expected it to sell over 4 million copies, catapulting Cash Money from a little-known Southern label into a national cultural force. Juvenile's raw, street-heavy lyrics in High and Back That Ass Up didn't just resonate. They etched themselves into the memory of a generation. At the time, Birdman wasn't just a label boss. He was a mentor, a partner. Their relationship wasn't written into contracts, but built through touring, recording, and sharing in the group's first waves of success. But eventually, the spotlight couldn't hide the unclear numbers. In 2001, Juvenile left Cash Money not with a bang, but in silence. Initially brushed off as creative differences, the truth slowly emerged. Juvenile believed Birdman failed to pay him fairly for album royalties. Specifically, he claimed to be owed $4 million. A legal battle followed, and ultimately Cash Money agreed to an $11 million out-of-court settlement. Still, the long-lasting wound wasn't financial. It was the feeling of being undervalued. In interviews years later, Juvenile didn't express anger. Instead, there was the quiet disappointment of someone who had trusted the very system he helped build. He once said, "I don't need to stay in a place that doesn't see me." It wasn't bitterness, it was hurt from contributions not being fairly acknowledged. Birdman's stance was different. He remained calm in the media, often deflecting with business logic. Everybody wants more than what they're paid. From one angle, he wasn't wrong, but in an industry where relationships are built on loyalty and emotion, that logic made people feel like tools. Was it perhaps this fundamental difference in valuing worth that kept them from walking the same path? In 2019, nearly 2 decades after their separation, Juvenile and Birdman released the album Just Another Gangsta. No public apologies, just music speaking for itself. A quiet signal of reconciliation between two men who once braved the early storms together. Yet even that return couldn't erase the feeling that things might have been better if fairness had been part of the foundation from the start. From Juvenile's story comes a vital question in creative ecosystems. Where is the balance between executive power and individual recognition? Can loyalty build an empire if benefit sharing isn't transparent? Because what's sobering is this Juvenile wasn't the only one to call Cash Money home, only to walk away wounded. Soon after, another younger brother, BG, would leave too, bringing with him a different kind of story. But this time, it wasn't just about money. It was about the heartbreak of something once believed to be family. BG, the little brother who felt betrayed. joining the label at just 12 years old. BG wasn't just a signed artist, he was the youngest brother. The kid Birdman and Slim protected and mentored through his first steps in both music and life. Success came early, born from authentic collaboration. With albums like Chopper City 1996, It's All On You Checkmate, and especially Chopper City in the Ghetto. 1999 BG became a pillar of Cash Money's rise from New Orleans streets to the national stage. Bling Bling, his track with Big Timers, wasn't just a hit, it became a cultural emblem, even making its way into the Oxford Dictionary as a symbol of the Southern rap lifestyle, lavish, loud, and proud. But behind the glow of success, cracks had already formed. After Juvenile's 2001 departure over financial disputes, BG followed suit the same year, a move that shocked many. Why would someone who once called Birdman daddy choose to walk away at his peak? Years later, BG openly admitted feeling betrayed. He claimed he never received a penny in royalties for albums released before 1998, despite being one of the defining voices of the label's sound. There was no public outburst, no angry tirade. BG's response was that of someone more hurt than enraged. He quietly withdrew, founded Chopper City Records, and released Livin' Legend, a 35-track album that stated loud and clear, "I'm still me, even without my old label." He never directly criticized Birdman, but the album title and song count said, "Enough, this was a quiet, but final farewell." Birdman, as in many similar cases, barely commented. His silence gave the impression that BG's departure was just another phase in a natural cycle. But among artists who had worked with Birdman, this silence had become a pattern. Everyone who left seemed to carry a wound, and Birdman rarely looked back. For BG, the betrayal wasn't only about money, it was about being met with cold indifference by someone he once trusted completely. Everything seemed to end there, until another twist. In 2009, BG was arrested for gun possession and later sentenced to 14 years in prison. During that time, Birdman didn't show up, not in court, not in public support, not even behind the scenes. No one is obligated to help, of course. But for someone who grew up under the Cash Money roof, who once called Birdman his father figure, that absence reopened the wound. To them, I was nothing anymore. BG's story isn't just a broken relationship between artist and label head. It's a reflection of deeper pain when someone you once called family chooses silence in your darkest hour. In the music industry, where personal bonds are often used as branding tools, family is an easy word to say, but a hard one to uphold. For BG, the greatest hurt wasn't unpaid royalties. It was realizing that the relationship he believed was blood deep was only skin deep. Once again, like Juvenile, BG left not just over money, but because he no longer felt truly seen. And as the story moves forward, Turk, the last brother in the Hot Boys crew, will show how emotional wounds can evolve into legal battles, where brotherhood must be appraised by the rules of court. Turk, the legal battle over a lost son. Among the 4 members of the Hot Boys, the group that defined Cash Money's golden era in the late 90s, Turk was perhaps the quietest figure. Born Tab Virgil Jr., he joined Cash Money before the age of 15, brought in from the 9th Ward by Birdman, like a younger brother, eventually helping redefine the Southern sound alongside Juvenile, BG, and Lil Wayne. Though not the most commercially prominent, Turk remained an inseparable part of that family, a quiet but steadfast presence. With a clipped, no-nonsense flow and a signature Southern drawl, Turk featured on massive hits like We on Fire, I Need a Hot Girl, and many of the group's peak albums. Yet behind the records, Turk lived fast and recklessly, his youth consumed by chaos, money, fame, and the streets. In 2004, as his bandmates' careers took different paths, Turk was involved in a shootout with police in a Memphis apartment. He was arrested and sentenced to nearly 9 years in prison, a harsh turning point for the once-cherished Cash Money prodigy. But the deepest wound for Turk wasn't prison. It was the silence during his incarceration. Behind bars, he felt abandoned. There were no restructured contracts, no steady financial support from the label he once called home. Worse yet, upon revisiting his career, Turk discovered a harsh truth during his time with Cash Money. He never received royalties for the tracks he had recorded and released. For someone who saw Birdman as a father, this wasn't just a financial oversight, it was a betrayal of trust. In 2015, 3 years after his release, Turk filed a lawsuit against Cash Money Records and Birdman seeking $1.3 million in unpaid royalties and other contractual damages. In the suit, Turk stated that Birdman had failed to fulfill any legal obligation toward him for years. This was a decisive move deeply conflicted. For someone who once saw the label head as a father figure taking legal action, felt like suing your own family. Birdman's response characteristically was silence. No media rebuttals, no angry statements, no public attempts at reconciliation. The lawsuit ended quietly, settled out of court. The payment was undisclosed, but enough for Turk to withdraw the case and conclude the legal dispute. Still, emotional damage doesn't resolve so easily. Later, Turk reflected, "I didn't want to go to war, but if I don't stand up for myself, no one will." That clarity led Turk to make a different choice. No more resentment, but no forgetting either. In later interviews, he continued to call Birdman brother, but as a brother, he chose to walk away from. The calm in Turk's voice revealed a desire not for conflict, but for acknowledgement as a man of worth, not just in his youth and talent, but also after life stumbles. Turk's story once again spotlights the fragile boundary between loyalty and legality in creative relationships. In the American music industry, especially hip-hop, family is often used as a branding strategy. But when transparency and mutual respect are missing, that family can dissolve into litigation. Artists like Turk, who entered the game as teenagers, with naive trust and protection, easily become victims of contract structures they never fully understood. And as adults, they must rely on the law to reclaim what should have been rightfully respected from the beginning. One has to ask if even those raised within the Cash Money empire are forced to sue each other. Does kinship in the music business truly hold up? Or is it simply a construct to fit a branding narrative? As Juvenile, BG, and now Turk step away from the house they once called home, we must wonder, is there anyone left who still believes Daddy is truly a father figure? That question becomes even more vivid in the next story, Mannie Fresh. A man who not only contributed vocals, but was the hand that shaped Cash Money's soul through sound. And for him, the conflict wasn't emotional, it was over something that should have been simple, the financial statements. Mannie Fresh, the tragedy of a founding pillar and the lesson of forgiveness. If Cash Money were a tree growing from the soil of New Orleans, then Mannie Fresh would be the sap flowing through its veins. Born Byron Thomas, he wasn't just the label's first music producer, he was the one who shaped the very sonic identity of the empire. From the signature Southern drums, the gritty rhythms of the streets, to the vibrant energy that made listeners nod their heads. For over a decade serving as the lead producer, Mannie didn't just make music for Cash Money, he designed the soul of the label. Even when names like Juvenile, Lil Wayne, or BG rose to fame, no one forgot that hits like Hago, DJ Bling Bling, and Back. That adds up all bore Mannie Fresh's musical signature. Each track he crafted felt like a musical promise, authentic, rooted, and unmistakably distinct from the East or West Coast rap styles. Yet in 2005, after 14 years of loyalty, Mannie Fresh announced he was leaving Cash Money. No public feud, no harsh accusations, he simply said, "I left because of money." That seemingly simple statement carried a bitter undertone. For someone who had been there from day one, sleeping in studios to finish albums leaving over money, wasn't about greed. It was about feeling abandoned in ledgers that reduced his work to a low-cost item. In many later interviews, Mannie revealed that he had never truly known the real financial figures behind Cash Money. Despite producing all the label's main albums, he wasn't granted access to revenue data profits or how expenses were split. He recounted sitting between Birdman and Slim, the two founders, listening to them discuss massive deals and fortunes, while he nodded along without knowing what, if anything, belonged to him. That imbalance over time turned into disillusionment. Still, Mannie Fresh's response wasn't one of public outrage. There were no lawsuits, no diss tracks. He quietly walked away, founded his own label, and continued producing for other artists. But if you pay attention, you'll notice in those years, he made no music for Cash Money. That silence spoke of someone who once gave his heart to an organization and chose distance as a way to heal. Then the most surprising thing happened: they reunited. In 2018, over a decade after his departure, Mannie Fresh returned to produce for Lil Wayne's Thaw Carter 5. The man, once seen as a disgruntled former employee, now contributed to the most anticipated album of the label's decade. When asked why he came back, Mannie didn't offer a concrete reason. He simply said, "Forgiveness isn't because they deserve it, but because you need to move on." That wasn't weakness. It was a conscious choice. While many other artists chose to confront Birdman, Mannie Fresh took a path that avoided further harm, even though he had every reason to criticize. Perhaps this was the clearest sign of maturity in an industry that often rewards emotional reactions. With all that he's been through, Mannie's story raises a broader question. In creative structures, is sustainable fairness possible if talent doesn't come with power? The people who make the product, the producers, engineers, arrangers, are often names that don't make it onto the record cover. But do the public and the industry truly recognize their role? Mannie Fresh proves that sometimes the soul of a brand isn't found in the loudest voice. He didn't seek justice by tearing others down, but by lifting himself through time, through new melodies. And from that very journey, a clear message emerges. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to let the wound guide your future. For Mannie, forgiveness is a creative act, like the music he makes, quiet, complete, and with a lasting echo. This story brings us to an even more complex relationship, where the bond of a professional father-son dynamic is tested to its limits. Because if Mannie Fresh built the soul of Cash Money, Lil Wayne was the one who took it to the top. And when that very spiritual son filed a $51 million lawsuit against Birdman, the relationship became not just a conflict, but an inevitable divorce. Lil Wayne, from father-son bond to a historic divorce. Among all the relationships that once revolved around Birdman and the Cash Money empire, none were as grand or as bitter as the story with Lil Wayne. If Birdman was the founder of Cash Money, then Lil Wayne was the one who elevated it to legendary status. They once called each other father and son, not in the biological sense, but in a rare professional bond seldom seen in hip-hop. Dwayne Michael Carter Jr. joined Cash Money at just 11 years old. Birdman quickly saw in the boy an undeniable light intelligence, discipline, and an obsession with words. Not long after, the young prodigy became the soul of the Hot Boys, then broke out solo with Tha Block Is Hot 1999, and continued evolving through mixtapes, official albums, and collaborations that extended beyond Cash Money. His peak came in 2008 when Tha Carter III became a phenomenon, selling over 3 million copies in the US alone and winning the Grammy for Best Rap Album. At that point, Lil Wayne wasn't just the label's star, he was the embodiment of the Birdman brand. In interviews from that era, Birdman proudly referred to Wayne as "my son," and Wayne in turn called him daddy with deep respect. They even released a joint album, Like Father, Like Son, 2006, a declaration of emotion and business about a bond they believed was unbreakable. But then everything began to crack in a way few anticipated. In 2014, when Tha Carter V, an album long in the making, was repeatedly delayed, Lil Wayne publicly criticized Birdman on Twitter, saying he felt like a prisoner within Cash Money. It was the first time Wayne revealed his frustration, not just over a delayed release, but over what he saw as the unjust imprisonment of his career and creativity for unclear reasons. In early 2015, Lil Wayne officially filed a $51 million lawsuit against Birdman and Cash Money, tied to royalties, contract advances, and profit shares from Young Money, the label he co-founded. The conflict extended beyond legal paperwork. There were countless painful moments, bitter interviews where Wayne called Cash Money a cage, and an incident where his tour bus was shot at in Atlanta, with later allegations suggesting ties to Birdman's associates, though no direct evidence implicated him. The media called it a historic divorce in hip-hop, where a father-son bond crumbled not from hatred, but from the sense of betrayal by the very person who once guided him. And what about Birdman? He maintained a calm silence, at least in public. In rare moments when asked about the relationship, he didn't retaliate. He simply said, "Wayne can say whatever he wants. I'll never speak badly about him. He's my son, and I'll always love him." But beneath those soft words lay a persistent stubbornness. Birdman still held contractual control, kept delaying the album, and showed no signs of compromise. until the 3-year legal battle finally forced his hand. In 2018, the two finally found common ground. Birdman took the stage, embraced Lil Wayne in front of thousands, and said, "I know I did some fucked up shit. I'm sorry for what happened. You know I love you." Wayne didn't say much, just nodded. The lawsuit ended shortly thereafter, reportedly with a $10 million settlement. Wayne regained full control of Young Money, the label that discovered and nurtured Drake, Nicki Minaj, and Tyga. Looking back, no one can deny that Lil Wayne transformed Cash Money from a regional southern label into a global powerhouse. But for that very reason, the wound he suffered cut deeper. This wasn't just a rift between two individuals, it reflected the broader tension between artists and executive power in today's music industry, where the boundary between loyalty and self-interest is constantly blurred. Lil Wayne once believed he and Birdman were father and son. In the end, he had to turn to the law to reclaim his rights, just like any entrepreneur defending his intellectual property. In the end, they reconciled. But the crack that once existed still remains a scar in both their memories. Wayne continued on his own path. Birdman carried on managing his empire. But both knew some relationships once pushed to the brink can never truly go back to what they were. And that's also why when a younger artist like Tyga found himself caught in a similar spiral album delays financial doubts, and having to buy back his own contract, no one was surprised. Because it seems that same vicious cycle within Cash Money is far from over. Tyga, the rebellious young talent and the coldness of the boss. When Tyga officially signed with Young Money Cash Money in the late 2000s, he was like a fresh breeze among a lineup already dominated by Lil Wayne, Drake, and Nicki Minaj. With his tight braids, trendy style, sharp rap delivery, and Compton street energy, Tyga represented a new generation full of ambition, those who saw Cash Money as a ladder to define themselves in a brutal industry. And Tyga had a solid start. His 2012 album Careless World Rise of the Last King sold over 500,000 copies, and the single Rack City quickly became a global hit, bringing him closer to mainstream fame. Under Young Money's wing, Tyga joined major tours featured in high-profile collaborations and built his own fanbase. Everything seemed to be going in the right direction. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Starting in 2014, Tyga publicly expressed dissatisfaction with how Cash Money was handling his music. On Twitter, he wrote that his new album, the Gold Album 18th Dynasty, was being shelved and not supported for release on time. He called his situation one of creative imprisonment, comparing the label to a golden cage still shining, but freedom long gone. Tyga didn't stop there. He declared he wanted to leave Young Money as soon as possible. When asked why he didn't shy away, "I feel like I'm not being respected as an artist. I have to find my own studio, run my own promo campaigns when that should be the label's responsibility." In 2015, Tyga decided to independently release the Gold album, a risky move, and also the formal end of his relationship with Cash Money. But the story didn't end there. In a 2017 interview, Tyga unexpectedly revealed Birdman owes me around $12 million. He didn't sue, didn't launch a boycott campaign, he simply stated the fact with a calm tone. And to gain his freedom, Tyga said he paid out of pocket about $1 million to buy back his own contract. That was the price for creative control, something that should have belonged to the artist from the beginning. Birdman's response almost chillingly indifferent. In later interviews, he never mentioned Tyga by name, only replied with skeptical tones. If someone says, "I owe them $12 million, why don't they sue? I haven't seen any lawsuit." His argument was contractual, not emotional. Birdman neither denied nor confirmed the claim, only scoffed that Tyga's sales didn't warrant concern. A source close to him even claimed that Tyga was the one who owed the label money. No one could verify who was right, but one thing was clear: the trust between them was gone. This coldness stood in stark contrast to how Birdman had treated Lil Wayne or Juvenile artists, who to some degree received apologies or public acknowledgement after their departures. With Tyga, it seemed the Cash Money boss viewed the relationship as a failed experiment, not worth regret, not worth revisiting. Perhaps it was because Tyga wasn't family in Birdman's sense of the word. He didn't grow up with. The label wasn't there. From childhood didn't share in the early grind. Tyga didn't collapse. On the contrary, after leaving Cash Money, he rebuilt his career with hits like Taste, featuring Offset, which went platinum and put him back on the contemporary rap map. He learned to manage his personal brand, take control of his sound, and rise in the independent music ecosystem, where control no longer lay in the hands of the big boss. From a distance, Tyga and Birdman's relationship can be seen as a clash between two generations. One side a young artist demanding creative control. The other, an executive used to old-school management. And like many generational conflicts, the tragedy wasn't in the difference, but in their inability to find common ground. And when outsiders artists who never even signed with Cash Money began speaking out about Birdman's treatment of collaborators, a new wave of criticism began to form. Rick Ross was one of them. But what made his words hit harder was this: he was once a friend. And when friends start expressing public disappointment, the damage is no longer personal. It becomes a matter of reputation. Rick Ross, when an outsider exposed Birdman's dark side. Rick Ross didn't grow up in the Cash Money family. He never signed with Birdman, never belonged to Young Money, and never sat at the dinner table with the Hot Boys during their golden era. But it was precisely because he wasn't part of that family that when Rick Ross spoke up, his words rang out like an alarm bell. Not from an old enemy, but from someone who was once a friend. That friendship was real. In the early 2010s, Rick Ross, the boss of Maybach Music, and Birdman were among the most powerful figures in Southern hip-hop. They appeared in music videos together, discussed a collaborative album, The H, though it was never officially released. Ross once called Birdman Big Bro, showing respect for a man who built an empire from the ground up. There was no formal contract between them, but there was something beyond contract's trust. However, things began to shift when Ross saw what was happening with Lil Wayne, Cash Money's #1 artist, whom Ross also respected. When Wayne publicly sued Birdman for $51 million when Thought Carter 5 was indefinitely delayed, and when young artists like Tyga openly walked away from the label, Rick Ross could no longer stay silent. In 2017, Ross released the track Idols Become Rivals, a cold-cutting rap that wasn't just a diss track, but a formal indictment. In the song, Ross didn't just criticize Birdman's treatment of Lil Wayne, but also name-dropped DJ Khaled, another artist who once worked with Cash Money and left quietly. Ross asked pointed questions. Did you really pay your producers? Did you ever pay Mannie Fresh? Why did everyone who built with you end up walking away? This wasn't jealousy. It was deep disappointment. Ross called Birdman a dark priest, a symbol of power dressed in glamour, hiding moral fractures underneath. He didn't declare war, but clearly showed his loss of faith. In an interview, Ross explained, "I used to admire him, but I can't stay silent when I see my brothers getting hurt." Birdman's response, as always, was neither an apology nor public outrage. Instead, he declined to comment directly and mocked, "I don't get caught up in that hoe side. I'm a businessman. I'm not a rapper living off complaints." That statement was classic Birdman, cold, proud, and full of implication. He seemed to believe that commercial success absolves him of any ethical accountability. "I've got 50 #1s. I don't owe anyone an explanation," he once said. But in the music industry, where artists are not just profit-generating tools, but individuals with emotions, personality, and pride, that silence can come off as apathy, even complicity in injustice. The fact that Rick Ross, an outsider, felt compelled to speak on behalf of those who once lived in Birdman's family showed just how deep the cracks had spread, not just a private matter, but a larger question of ethics in this business. Rick Ross chose not to pursue further conflict after Idols Become Rivals. He didn't stretch out the feud, didn't keep using Birdman as subject matter to attract attention in his later work. He let the music say what needed to be said. But that track still holds its weight as a reminder that credibility doesn't come from sales numbers, but from how you treat those who once placed their trust in you. Looking back on the journey through 7 key figures, Juvenile to BG, Mannie Fresh to Lil Wayne, Turk to Tyga, and finally Rick Ross, a larger picture begins to take shape. Power is never permanent, and loyalty, if not nurtured by fairness, will eventually turn into goodbye. And Birdman at age 56 must have come to realize that what sustains an empire is not the number of records sold or spots on the charts, but how people remember it after the music stops playing. If this story gave you pause, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and share to help uncover the untold shadows of the hip-hop world. There are still many truths waiting to be revealed.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast.
There is still so much more to explore. Stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.